Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan. An old school iPhone comic book review. What year is this? All right, I'm looking at Dave Gibbons' The Originals. Now, if you don't know Dave Gibbons' name right off the top of your head, let me remind you he's the artist on Watchmen. And I hate Alan Moore, but I really like Dave Gibbons' art for Watchmen. So I was really interested to pick this up. And this is kind of like a facilitation of what is actually cool about being a boomer when being a boomer has kind of become an internet joke. So the Diversity in Comics channel, he used to talk all the time about how older generations would actually live a life and hang out on the streets and get in fights and do all that kind of stuff. And then that became fodder for their superhero stories. And Dave Gibbons is literally doing that in the originals. And if you read his introduction and conclusion, he tells you about the real life experiences that he then takes and exaggerates and fictionalizes for the originals. So what the originals are supposed to be are the mods, which I'd actually never heard of before reading this. And the mods used to get in gang fights with the greasers back in the 60s. So this is transformed into the originals in the dirts. And it's kind of like a futuristic setting where they've got hover vehicles, but everything has a retro 1950s, 1960s look. And what Dave Gibbons said about his experiences is he wanted to capture the feeling of being in one of these, gangs of, dangerous young men doing speed and cocaine and what have you. And so he'd like really pump up the drama and the motorcycles. He'd make everything try to look cooler. Like this one really stood out to me. So something he likes to do in this is he'll have these thick bars at the outline and kind of like a steady, rhythm for the smaller panels, do 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 do, and then he'll hit you with like a big moment like this, where the whole idea is to capture the emotion of running into one of these gangs the first time. So as an example of his life experience, like he really did. He was just hanging out, and the mods drove up to him and asked him where the local greasers were, and he told them. Now, in this, the originals drive up to Lel, ask him where the local dirt are, and then Lel and Bach join the crew. So Lel and Bach are the two male protagonists, and I don't think I want to spoil everything in the plot. This is a recommendation for Dave Gibbons' art. It has a lot of profanity and a lot of violence, and I think that's because Gibbons is trying to capture like a moment in history and then bring that into a fictional context. So I think it's appropriate for the kind of story he wants to tell. It's about gang violence. So Lel has become a original. He's one of the cool kids selling drugs, living that lifestyle, and he falls in love with the lovely Viv. And what's interesting about this is how much this facilitates like the boomer experience. It's like when he's young and handsome and selling drugs, he's a cool bad boy, right? But then what Viv really wants is for him to grow up and be a man and stop selling drugs and provide her security, right? So Gibbons is kind of facilitating that life experience of being a young man, getting in fights, being a ne'er-do-well, hating the cops, hating the greatest generation who fought in World War II and wanting to be edgy and rebel against that. But then, of course, you have to grow up and learn that if you keep living that lifestyle, you're going to die. There's some really poignant drama, life and death situations that kind of force Lel to rethink his lifestyle and his life choices. So I won't spoil that, but I think it's a really powerful, neat, brief story that kind of facilitates those things. And there's also some it's interesting to think about this as an example of masculinity, post Gillette ad, because what's represented here is actual toxic masculinity. But the problem with toxic masculinity is seemingly everything gets wrapped up into that. So a reminder of a time when boomers were actually somewhat cool, if very destructive and dangerous. Boomers rebelled against the greatest generation by going and getting high and getting into fights and ruining their bodies and ruining their lives. Millennials rebel against the boomer generation by staying indoors and whining on Twitter until all the institutions are destroyed. But I really, really enjoyed it. The introduction, he is where he kind of like recounts all of his real life experiences that inspired this. I just want to talk about his creative process and his character art. So he's got mind maps where he just does word associations with certain things, and then what is it? So word associations with mods, and then feeling associations with mods to identify key things to capture. And then he just shows you all kinds of concept art from his planning stages, from like his pencils. He's got what look like ink wash studies and lettering. He's just a complete one-man army. This actually isn't my favorite cover of all of them. I kind of like the rawness of his gesture sketch, and then towards like the polished look of the final, like, I don't know, something looks a little wall-eyed about that. But I really love these. This is either graphite stick or probably like vine charcoal or something, where you can just get like a really that's like 5 seconds of shading, and it really establishes the drama of that scene. I love Gibbons' art so much. I think a lot of people try to ape the old school look, and Gibbons captures the old school look because he just draws simple cartoon figures with a lot of expressive emotional energy and really clean, really carefully considered line work, which is how he's able to capture, like, you know, that beautiful 1950s, 1960s belle, right? What else does he do? I guess like there's also a lot of variety to it. So, you know, like traditional pencil sketch, ink sketch, another pencil sketch, maybe like a marker, like really loose, thick black brush, I'm guessing. And I know he does do digital work, so I'm not sure what his combination of traditional and digital tool is, but Gibbons is a legend. All these facial studies, front view, profile, three-quarter view, and then you can see he reworked Lell and Bach twice because they're the protagonists, so he had to kind of focus on them a little bit, and the very slight variations in, you know, chin shape and hairline is fascinating. Every character is distinct: almond chin, handsome kind of square chin, big double, you know, fat double chin. Let's see, both these guys kind of have the double chin. What would I call that? I don't know. It's like it's the opposite. I don't know the technical terms for all these face shapes, but it's just a really great collection of someone with a consistent style, you know, working the skeleton, working the skull, working the hairline, just so much variety in each character to make them all distinct. Even little like 3-second, you know, doofs as he's like scripting, and logo design and typography. What a one-man army. This became an altered version of this cover, so you can see he uncovered the face a bit, and in this original promotional art, they had a more consistent fashion for each of them. Man, I love Dave Gibbons. Character studies, so he's just like drawing all. This one's a little goofy, like he's trying to figure out the shape, so it's clearly he's just working on it. And then there's trim on that one. I love the variety in it. Like he knows what he wants to capture, and he's got to like keep at it until he captures it just the right way. And all the motorcycles and stuff. Like he joked that thankfully, since he took away the wheels and made them hovercraft, that saved him from having to draw thousands of ellipses on the motorcycles. So maximum respect. I just love getting to see an artist process like this. Again, okay, there's the finished art, but there's like so much. I like not seeing the eyes in kind of like these intense gesture sketches for it. More hovercrafts. I freaking love his hovercrafts. He told a joke in his experiences that the real mods would have looked a little silly because, you know, they're scooters. They were just guys in big coats on scooters. So they would have looked a little ridiculous. So he had to make them cool and almost unearthly. And I think he 100% caught that. And one last thing. All right, so Dave Gibbons he's a boomer, but he's also pretty boss. And the original is it's sort of without censoring it, trying to capture the sinfulness and the violence and the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of mod culture of the 1960s. I think that it leaves you with kind of a bittersweet ending. So I think that the ultimate moral of the story is a moral one, even though it depicts atrocious acts of evil. It's about It's a story that's about how that you can't just like flirt with that kind of a lifestyle. You're either all absorbed in that, you know, destructive kind of lifestyle, or you are becoming a more mature human being, which is what women like Viv actually want. So I say props to the moral of the originals, and just a really interesting look at the actual toxic masculinity of the 1960s. So I'm number one Marmaduke fan. I really respect Dave Gibbons as an artist, and this is just a one-man army of everything that he could ever want to express in his own work, down to every little panel, every little sketch and character design and motorcycle design. This was a passion project, and it shows. You will really enjoy the art of the originals. So, number one Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. I'll catch you later.